Have you ever tried to convince someone to do something that was clearly good for them, only to watch them do the exact opposite? You tell someone to stop texting their toxic ex. They go right back. You tell a teenager not to date a certain person. Suddenly that person becomes the love of their life. You pressure a customer to buy. They walk away. You tell your partner to calm down. They become even more emotional. Why does this happen? Why do people resist advice, reject authority, and sometimes sabotage themselves just to prove they can? The answer lies in one of the most powerful psychological forces in human behavior: reactance. And once you understand it, you'll start seeing it everywhere. Because reactance isn't just something other people experience, you experience it too. Every single day. Most people think human beings are motivated primarily by pleasure. Others think we're motivated by pain. But there's another force that's often stronger than both: the desire to remain free. And the moment someone threatens that freedom, a hidden psychological alarm goes off inside the brain. That alarm says, "Nobody tells me what to do." That's reactance. Reactance is a psychological response that occurs when people feel their freedom, autonomy, or ability to choose is being restricted. The more someone feels controlled, pressured, manipulated, or forced, the more they want to resist. Even when resistance makes absolutely no logical sense. This is where human behavior becomes fascinating. Because reactance isn't based on what's objectively best. It's based on protecting freedom. Imagine a sign that says, "Do not touch wet paint." Suddenly many people want to touch it. Not because touching paint is enjoyable, not because they doubt the sign, but because the restriction itself creates curiosity. The forbidden becomes attractive. The unavailable becomes valuable. The restricted becomes desirable. And this simple principle affects relationships, parenting, marketing, politics, friendships, and even personal growth. Most people completely underestimate how powerful it is. Let's start with relationships. This is where reactance creates some of the biggest problems. Many people believe that if they push harder, they'll get better results. More pressure, more demands, more control, more chasing. But often the opposite happens. The harder you push, the more resistance you create. Think about someone who constantly demands attention. "Why didn't you text me? Where are you? Who are you with? You need to call me more. You should spend more time with me." The intention might be love, but the other person often experiences something very different. Control, pressure, restriction. And once that feeling appears, reactance follows. They pull away. They become distant. They stop responding. Not necessarily because they stopped caring, but because they feel their freedom shrinking. This is why many people accidentally destroy attraction while trying to increase it. The more they attempt to force closeness, the more the other person wants distance. Most men miss this. Most women miss this too. They assume resistance means lack of interest. Sometimes that's true. But sometimes resistance is simply reactance. The person isn't running from you. They're running from pressure. And there's a huge difference. Now let's talk about parenting. If you've ever seen a teenager, you've seen reactance in action. Parents often think, if I forbid something, my child will avoid it. Reality often works differently. The forbidden thing becomes more interesting. The restricted behavior becomes more attractive. The harder the rule is enforced, the stronger the urge to rebel. This doesn't mean parents should remove all boundaries. That's not the lesson. The lesson is understanding psychology. People need structure, but they also need autonomy. When someone feels they have no voice, reactance increases. When someone feels heard and respected, reactance decreases. This principle applies to adults just as much as teenagers. We just disguise it better. Adults still rebel. We simply call it independence. Now let's look at sales and marketing. The smartest marketers understand reactance extremely well. They know that people hate feeling manipulated. The moment customers feel pressured, alarms go off. The customer starts looking for reasons to say no, not because the product is bad, but because they want to regain control. This is why aggressive sales tactics often fail. The salesperson keeps pushing, the customer keeps resisting, the pressure grows, the resistance grows. It's a psychological tug of war. But skilled communicators do something different. They offer options, they create choice, they guide rather than force. And because freedom remains intact, resistance stays low. Here's where it gets even more interesting. Reactance doesn't only happen when someone actually takes away your freedom. It can happen when you merely believe they might. That's why certain phrases instantly trigger people. You have to. You must. You need to. You should. You're not allowed. Notice how these phrases feel. Even reading them can create subtle resistance. The brain interprets them as threats to autonomy, and once that threat is detected, cooperation drops. This is why effective communicators often ask questions instead of giving orders. Questions preserve freedom. Commands threaten it. One creates engagement, the other creates resistance. But here's where it gets worse. Reactance doesn't just affect what people do, it affects how they think. When people experience reactance, they often become less objective. They start defending positions they don't even fully believe. They argue harder. They justify poor decisions. They reject evidence, not because the evidence is weak, but because changing their mind feels like surrendering freedom. Suddenly, the discussion isn't about truth anymore, it's about autonomy, and autonomy usually wins. This explains countless arguments online, political debates, relationship conflicts, family disagreements. People aren't always defending ideas. Sometimes they're defending freedom, and those are very different things. Now let's talk about the hidden danger of reactance. The danger is that it can cause self-sabotage. People sometimes reject good advice simply because they don't like being told what to do. They ignore warnings. They dismiss expertise. They resist opportunities. Not because they're wrong, but because they arrived from someone else. This can become extremely expensive, emotionally, financially, professionally. A person can spend years fighting solutions that would improve their life. Why? Because accepting the solution feels like losing independence. Reactance can quietly trap people in problems they secretly want to escape. But here's the good news. Once you're aware of reactance, you can start reducing its influence. The first step is recognizing it in yourself. The next time you instantly reject advice, pause. Ask yourself, am I rejecting this because it's wrong? Or am I rejecting it because I don't like being told what to do? That's a powerful question. Most people never ask it. The second step is learning how to communicate with others more effectively. Instead of forcing, invite. Instead of demanding, suggest. Instead of controlling, collaborate. Instead of saying, you need to do this, try, what do you think about this option? The difference seems small. Psychologically, it's enormous. One threatens freedom, the other preserves it. And preservation of freedom dramatically reduces resistance. The third step is understanding that influence is rarely about pressure. Pressure creates reactance. Reactance creates resistance. Resistance destroys influence. Real influence works differently. Real influence makes people feel that the decision is theirs. Because ultimately, people don't just want good outcomes. They want ownership. They want choice. They want autonomy. They want to feel free. And that desire is one of the strongest forces in human psychology. The irony is that the more desperately you try to control people, the less control you actually have. The more freedom you allow, the more cooperation often appears. That's the paradox of reactance. People fight hardest for freedom when they believe it's under attack. And sometimes the fastest way to make someone move toward you is to stop pushing them. Because human beings are wired to protect their freedom. The moment that freedom feels threatened, reactance wakes up. And once reactance takes over, logic becomes weaker, emotions become stronger, and resistance becomes almost automatic. Understand reactance, and you'll understand why people rebel, why relationships struggle, why marketing fails, why arguments escalate, and why forcing rarely works. Because the truth is simple. The moment people feel trapped, their first instinct isn't cooperation, it's escape.